Hello, I'm Daisy, and this is a video essay titled Problems with Ryan Murphy, Why Ryan Murphy Sucks. And while this may seem lacking in nuance, hopefully you'll agree with me by the end of the video. Let's start out with the most obvious question. Who is Ryan Murphy? Glee, American Horror Story, Scream Queens, American Crime Story, and now Dahmer. Ryan Murphy is responsible for some of the most popular shows of the past decade, and chances are you've probably either heard of him or one of his many projects before. He is one of the biggest television producers in Hollywood right now and doesn't seem to be losing any momentum anytime soon. But why should you care? What could he possibly have to do with you? The truth is that within most of Ryan Murphy's shows, he's left behind a lovely trail of ridiculously problematic content, most of which gets overlooked or excused, from racism to making light of eating disorders to bringing up genuine trauma. Murphy's dipped his toes into many a shitty pool. Without further ado, my comprehensive list of each and every problem. Mind you, I am one person, so I may have missed things, but this is what I found to the best of my knowledge. In order to ease us in, I figured we'd start out with the least worst, starting out with 911. 911 is a popular Fox drama following first responders. I personally was incredibly surprised the first time I found out Ryan Murphy was a showrunner for 911 because I was like, 911? That's a show about regular like firefighters and cops. And it doesn't really seem like Ryan Murphy's like campy cup of tea. But to me, 911 is like a perfect example of just how far Ryan Murphy's reach extends. He stuck his fingers into so many popular projects that most Americans have probably seen a Ryan Murphy show without actually realizing it was a Ryan Murphy show. For this show, although the claims aren't the most extreme, viewers and fans of 911 have been upset by two of the main characters, Buck and Eddie, and they're very like unclear queer question mark relationship. One of my best friends is an avid 911 watcher, and she agrees with the claims of queer baiting, which is a tad bit ironic because Ryan Murphy is a gay man. But either way, since this show is like so like mild, it's so tame, the fact that even this show has a problem, it's an indicator of what's to come. Next, we have Ratched. Ratched is a Netflix original series following a nurse in a 1940s asylum as a prequel to the 1975 film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I haven't seen it. Sorry. Ratched has been criticized for simultaneously lacking in diversity, which, I mean, it's the 1940s, but still having only white characters is an interesting choice, and also giving its very few characters of color no plot lines with any depth, particularly in relation to their plot lines relating to racism. They just sort of experience it, but then don't experience it deep enough for it to have any real meaning. So it's just a questionable choice overall. Ratched has also been criticized for having a disproportionate amount of violence directed towards its black characters, although the show is quite violent overall, so this holds a little bit less weight for me. Ratched hardly ever gets discussed when talking about Ryan Murphy's shows. People probably don't even know that it's a Ryan Murphy show, which is why I placed it in with the least worst, although racism is definitely bad. It can always get worse when it comes to Ryan Murphy. Our next group of shows is listed under the title in my notes as Ooh, this is bad. So it gets worse. Starting with Scream Queens. Scream Queens, with its stacked cast and incredible concept, has always stood out to me. Maybe it's because of the stunning wardrobe, maybe it's because the main character, Chanel Oberlin, is incredibly quotable, but I've always had a soft spot for it personally. However, this is in spite of all of its issues. Chanel is one of the funniest mean girls in modern television, and that is one of Ryan Murphy's favorite genres of character to write, but she manages to take it too far on the regular. Ryan Murphy's loving the mean girl means that he often gets those mean girls characters we're meant to hate to say some of his most offensive jokes. So we as the audience are supposed to think that Chanel's awful, but at the same time, in this show, she's the protagonist, so Murphy just winds up sending mixed signals in which Chanel fat shames, slut shames, and utilizes many harmful stereotypes in her creative insults, racist stereotypes, like referring to her sorority's housemaid as a white mammy, which is just like so offensive. It's like kind of ridiculous. I get that she's portrayed as someone who's not good, like she's supposed to be this horrible white Republican bitch, but also having the person that I'm supposed to be rooting for being incredibly racist doesn't exactly make me feel warm and fuzzy on the inside. It just makes me very uncomfortable. Well, I've never watched American Horror Story because I literally cannot handle horror in the slightest. Even I haven't managed to escape its cultural impact. Like, I know what it is, I know what it's about. I know half of the plot lines of half of the season. And it's a cool concept, I'll admit it. Like, it's cool. Each season revolves around an entirely new horror based idea: an asylum, a haunted hotel, a creepy freak show, etc. Not to mention the incredible number of stars in its cast, including Sarah Paulson, Evan Peters, Emma Roberts, and the incredible Lady Gaga. But it being a Ryan Murphy show just means it's another piece of the puzzle that is Ryan Murphy's twisted maze of problematic content. Many of the seasons, including Hotel and 1984, contain depictions of very real serial killers played by Evan Peters and Zach Villa. I'm so sorry, Zach. I don't know how to say your last name. Both of which are conventionally attractive men. American Horror Story does this thing where it sort of just goes, look at this crime is actually kind of sexy and cool when we wrap it up inside a fictional plot element and story. And if it were entirely fake serial killers, I would be like, okay, sure, dope. But these are real murderers who killed many real people, and they don't deserve to be shown as anything other than the monsters that they were, including hot dudes. Like, hello? Zach Villa particularly plays Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and Zach Villa is hot. Like, it's not good casting. But Richard Ramirez already has, like, creepy fans of him who are like, woo, he's hot. And casting someone who is actually hot to play him is like such a bad idea. All of this is to say that over the years, American Horror Story has received criticism for romanticizing serial killers. American Horror Story has also received criticism for, you guessed it, racism. This is going to be a running theme. The main complaint about this I found was in a complex article titled Ryan Murphy, Racist? Which just seems so fitting for this. And their main complaint in the article is that during the Coven season, a season about witch coven, the character Madame Delphine Lalaurie, so sorry if I'm not saying that right, like I said, I have not watched the show. She brutally tortures and torments her slaves at the time, and then later in the show gets a minor redemption when she starts to change post death upon learning about the civil rights movement. The article makes a good point in that this character doesn't deserve any sympathy or a chance at redemption in the viewer's eyes. Like, just because she may have seen a hint of change doesn't reverse or excuse all the horrible racist things she's done in the show prior. This choice is but one of many racist choices that Ryan Murphy has made throughout his filmography. And I don't like this pattern that is forming. It's not a good pattern. I don't like it. Our next two shows on this list are called The Big Bads. So, have fun with that. Glee, while not Ryan Murphy's first project or anything, is probably one of his biggest claims to fame, and in its heyday, it was something of a phenomenon, receiving like tens of millions of views an episode. Glee was a huge part of my development as a middle school theater kid. Yes, I was one of those. I am a Gleek. And yet, Glee's a monster of its own. Whenever I go back and watch Glee, I always wonder how in the world did they manage to get away with those things? 2009 doesn't feel like it was so far away as for some of these things to be acceptable. And clearly they were because they managed to make it into this show. Firstly, ding ding ding, racism. She's back. She's back with passion. Throughout the show, the lack of diversity is indisputable, and the few main cast characters of color receives little to no spotlight, often only used as a tool to prop up the main white characters, who are essentially the real stars of the show. They're given super shallow plot lines, often just like given a romance or a love interest, just like give them something to do. The one main cast black character for most of the show, Mercedes Jones, is a plus size character and usually gets plot lines in regards to her weight or like not being able to find a love interest or like having a show off with the main white character who usually wins the show off. None of them are like good, deep plot lines about this character and her backstory. I know nothing about her parents. I know that the main white character has two gay dads. I don't think I've ever seen Mercedes Jones' parents in Glee once, ever. Neglect is not the only problem, obviously. It is a big problem, though. There's a disturbing amount of, like, not subtly at all racist jokes and a heavy reliance on stereotypes. Glee is a parody. I just want to make it clear, Glee is a parody of like a regular high school drama, although sometimes it kind of turns into a high school drama, but it started out as a parody. And so including stereotypes is like a little bit unavoidable when you're supposed to be parodying those stereotypes, but sometimes it doesn't feel like they're making fun of those stereotypes at all. It feels like they're playing into them, including the racist jokes about Asian couples therapy by the Asian character Tina Cohen Chang, who later comments on how close the Asian community is when Rachel Berry, the white lead, is discovered to have sent a Filipino student, Sunshine Corazon, to a not active crack house. That was a real plot line. No, Rachel did not receive any repercussions for these actions, and everyone probably forgot about it. That was in season 2. There are 4 more seasons of this show, and it is never mentioned once. The main white character sends an Asian girl to a crack house. A lot of racist jokes come from, again, a mean girl character, Kitty Wilde, who shows up in season 4. And then a bunch of racist jokes come from Coach Sue Sylvester, who is like a general antagonist and mean person. Both of these characters are humanized a bunch of times in this show at a bunch of different points. And so it's like, are they real people? Am I supposed to be like, oh, hey, she's not so bad after all? Or am I supposed to be like, oh, this person is pure evil to their core and we're just supposed to find it funny? It's unclear and it's not good because the racism is still there, even if you try and make us forget it. Sadly, we next have the eating disorder content. In Studies of Popular Culture, Volume 36, Number 2, Sonia C. Brown wrote an article called Body Image, Gender, Social Class, and Ethnicity on Glee. It's incredible. Throughout the article, she explains the different ways certain characters were portrayed in relation to issues of body image and their intersections with their race, gender, etc. It's a very good read, and the link will be in the description. Brown examines 4 characters, but I'm just going to be focusing on one, Marley Rose. She's victim to one of the worst eating disorder plots I have ever had the displeasure to behold and experience. It's just awful. Marley, who already struggles with comparison and self-image, is egged on by aforementioned mean girl Kitty into developing bulimia after scoring the lead in the musical, during which Kitty secretly steals and alters Marley's costumes into being tighter in order to make her think that she's gaining weight, and in order to embarrass her in front of the Glee Club. Marley later faints from starving herself on stage during a competition, which leads to the club's disqualification, and Marley is blamed for it. While Kitty is later exposed in the series, she's also later redeemed, like I said earlier, and she's turned into one of the good guys, and the eating disorder is just never brought up again. The whole plot is just completely discarded, and it receives no real satisfying conclusion. This plot makes a mockery of eating disorders and is really just painful to experience. And Kitty is written as so awful and yet still redeemed later on, which just sort of blows my mind. Now we have biphobia. As a gay man, Ryan Murphy's portrayal of queer women has sometimes been a bit questionable. This especially extends to bisexual character Brittany as Pierce. Although Glee is often lauded for its positive LGBTQ plus representation, it was one of the first shows to have a bunch of explicitly gay characters on like mainstream television. Brittany is a stellar example of bi erasure. Despite her consistent attraction to both men and women throughout the show, she's never labeled as bisexual or pansexual or omnisexual, none of the above. Instead, we're being referred to as not totally gay and bi-curious. The issue with this is explained super well in the paper The Invisible Bee, Bisexual Erasure and Biphobia on the television series Glee by Adriana Shriver-Kurtz and Fabiana Marsilia Thomas, in which they explain one of the main stereotypes regarding bisexuality is that it's seen as just a phase. By calling herself bi-curious, Brittany also contributes to bisexual erasure, denying bisexuality as an identity and seeing it only as a practice. Brittany is a token bisexual character used for the stereotype without any real representation at all. Refusing to label your bi character as bi sort of defeats the point of having a bisexual character in the first place. And Murphy also perpetuates a bunch of negative stereotypes about bisexuals, despite their refusal to use the correct label. Brittany is one of the most sexually active characters in the show, which is generally a negative stereotype that is forced upon bisexual women. I'm not saying that like sexual activity in itself is bad, it's just bisexual women are seen as like extremely promiscuous, and making his one bisexual character like the most sexually active character on the whole show. There's an undertone there, and I don't like it. I don't like the undertone. Another super fun negative stereotype about bisexuals is that they're all cheaters. And yes, Brittany does cheat on her male partner at the time with a woman, which, just perpetuating another very negative stereotype. Bisexuals are not all cheaters, and making your only bisexual character be a cheater is super not a good look. The harm of these stereotypes alone is enough to write off some of the representation points that Glee is often awarded for their diversity in this department. Glee also has a variety of other problems that aren't as big as the others, but still deserve honorable mentions, including, but not limited to, a watered-down school shooter plotline. Yep. Bullying of gay teens being made light of. The aftermath of a teen pregnancy plotline just being completely erased, like it never happened. Like she was never even pregnant. It was crazy. Hiring an able-bodied actor to play the main disabled member of the cast who is in a wheelchair, and then having said character dance during dream sequences, a thing that should not be possible because he is disabled, and ironically perform I'm Still Standing with another character who is temporarily in a wheelchair due to a texting and driving PSA plotline that magically resolves itself. Like it never happened. Like one day she just poof is not in the wheelchair anymore. And then there was also that time that two teenage boys joined an a cappella group with their teachers and then proceeded to sing about sex for other adults. Yeah, I'm looking at you, a cappellas. Lastly, Glee's worst crime of all is Will Schuester. I'm only half kidding. Fans of Glee like to joke about how Matthew Morrison, the actor that played Will, needs to pay for his crimes against humanity, most of which happened during his role as Will. And I genuinely agree. He does some horrible things as Will Schuester. Will is the faculty sponsor for the Glee Club, and he plays favorites at every single turn. He's the reason why a bunch of the characters of color just completely get ignored because he always favors the white characters. He breaks up healthy relationships, and he also sings about many sexual things with his underage students on multiple occasions, including that time that he refused to allow his transgender student access to a safe bathroom, instead opting to exercise his right to twerk with said underage students, particularly to the date rapey song Blurred Lines by Robin Thicke. He is genuinely a horribly problematic character, and he's somehow still depicted as the protagonist throughout the entire show. I know it makes me want to bang my head against the wall too. And with all that being said, I hope that the next time that you reminisce about Glee with fond memories, you maybe take a second to remember all of the insane and horrible shit that actually happened. Particularly the racism, because this is not to mention the alleged racism and microaggressions by the series lead, Leah Michele, the actress who played Rachel Berry, who would need to be a topic for a different video because this one is just about Ryan Murphy. And he's not technically responsible for the things that the actors that he hired does, but I mean, he's continued to have a close relationship with Leah Michele after the show, so I feel like that might be worth mentioning. He doesn't keep incredibly good company. We're finally at Dahmer. Woo! Dahmer is maybe the worst defender out of everyone on this list, probably because it has the most real life implications. And it's also probably the most talked about as of late because it was just released in September of 2022. The full title is Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, and it's sometimes aptly referred to as only Monster, which is so fitting. It's a Netflix original series that chronicles the life of the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Thinking about the show just it makes me a little sick. It's not because of the gore either, it's because of how like gross the people that made this show have to be in order to create it. It makes me feel so gross, like inside. I don't like it at all. I also really hated researching this show. I don't. I like true crime, but it was icky. I did not like this at all. The main issue of this show comes to us in the form of an essay on Insider.com by Rita Isbell, the sister of Errol Lindsay, who was one of Dahmer's victims. During Dahmer's trial, Isbell gave like a super powerful victim impact statement that was then completely recreated down to her hairstyle and hoop earrings and the shirt that she was wearing on the show, and then her statement was also copied verbatim. And the sameness between her and the actress in the show is what made Isabel feel like she was reliving it all over again. She was transported back to her trauma due to this show and had to relive the horrible pain that followed her brother's death. And this was all without warning due to the fact that Isabel also says that Netflix never contacted her, not once, which I mean is alleged, but still. Murphy himself claimed that he attempted to reach out to the victims' families during the writing process, and apparently no one responded to him. But I'm definitely more inclined, personally, to believe the victim in this situation, which is Isabel, the family of the victim. As Isabel herself says in the essay, that's what this show is about, Netflix trying to get paid. And Netflix did not give any of the proceeds of this show to any of the families of the victims whose stories that they're profiting off of. And that's like super cowardly considering the resounding success of this show in terms of viewership. A tweet by Isabel's cousin describes my thoughts on the situation pretty well, saying, recreating my cousin having an emotional breakdown in court in the face of the man who tortured and murdered her brother is wild. Because it is. It's absolutely wild. The audacity that Ryan Murphy has is insane. And I think the fact that they're just sort of like denying this and covering the whole situation up, it screams like not believing a black woman to me, and that doesn't feel nice. It gives me bad vibes. Needless to say, I will not be watching Dahmer. I have not watched Dahmer. It's not happening. In addition to profiting off of real people's trauma, the show could also originally be found under Netflix's LGBT tag that shocked a lot of viewers. And I mean, like, rightly so, because the show depicts the gruesome murders of and violence against queer men. That's not usually what comes to mind when one thinks of good LGBTQ plus representation. A bunch of people on TikTok and Twitter like freaked out and they weren't impressed, which eventually led to Netflix removing the tag, although it was against Ryan Murphy's own wishes. Like, he came out and said he wanted the tag to still be there because the show was supposedly foremost about representing Dahmer's gay victims, which is ironic to me because of the whole Isabel situation. It's for the victims, and you're not giving the victims any profits, and you're refusing to actually talk to them. Murphy also said that not all gay stories have to be happy stories, and I don't disagree with that. I just also don't think that lumping the trauma, horror, and violence against gay men that is depicted in Monster with a show like Netflix's Young Royals would be the right move. Putting them all under one tag is not super smart. It's like a horror show, first and foremost, and it should be treated as such. And Murphy's attempts to defend it feel really out of touch with how it's being viewed by everyone else. Lastly, Dahmer is just one more Ryan Murphy show romanticizing a serial killer. Evan Peters is the person who was cast for Dahmer, and he is conventionally attractive, like I mentioned in the American Horror Story section. He's conventionally attractive and he has a solid fan base of young women who support him in all of his roles. They make TikTok edits, they post about him on Instagram, like it's a whole thing. He has fans. And choosing someone like him, even though he's a Ryan Murphy favorite, he was in American Horror Story, it was not the best choice. Like, there could have been better choices to play him, and choosing someone who is popular and conventionally attractive was not one of them. Even he looks creepy from what I've seen. Everyone loves him, even though he looks creepy. That's just sort of how Evan Peters looks. No offense to Evan Peters, but like, he looks a little creepy. Also, in relation to romanticizing serial killers, is that following its release in late September, Dahmer has sparked the emergence of several Jeffrey Dahmer Halloween costumes because it was right before October, Halloween month. Dressing up as a genuine sociopath and serial killer is not only weird as hell, like it's so strange. Why are you doing that? It's also just like super disrespectful to all of Jeffrey Dahmer's many victims who had to suffer from this man's actual cruelty. And simply put, it's disgusting. Don't do it. I do believe that without the train wreck that this show was, there would not have been that many Jeffrey Dahmer costumes, especially the ones that were like trending on Twitter. And given that they're like already sickos that like love serial killers and love Jeffrey Dahmer without the romanticization of this show, it was almost inevitable for his fan base to grow. And that just makes me think that overall Dahmer has had so many awful consequences that it probably would have been better if it hadn't been made in the first place. Ryan Murphy just shouldn't have done that. It shouldn't have been a thing. I figured I'd end the list with Ryan Murphy's most recent exploit, The Watcher. It was just released in late November of 2022. I think that this true crime story, true crime, has been somewhat butchered by Ryan Murphy. As a former BuzzFeed Unsolved fan and a current Watcher Network fan, I've been familiar with the Watcher story for a while because BuzzFeed Unsolved True Crime did an episode on it in 2019. Several reviews have found the story lacking and found some of the details that have been changed a bit unsettling, like the not real teenage daughter who has a relationship with an older man. The real family involved with the Roger case did request that their children's ages, names, etc. be changed for the show for their own privacy, which, like, I totally respect that, and I actually agree with that heavily. But as Amanda from Swell Entertainment pointed out in her review of the show, the children still could have been young. They could have been completely different ages from the ages they were during the story, and they could still not be teenagers, and there wasn't any need to bring in this weird like sexual element to it. Like it makes me very uncomfortable, especially because it's still sort of based on these real people. There haven't been any like serious problems with this show yet, like racism or making light of the serious issues discussed in it or anything. And Murphy actually talked to the victims this time because he managed to change the children's ages. But the fact that Murphy still fails to do the story justice and instead like wraps it inside fabricated drama sort of just like speaks to how his future as a producer may fare if he can't exist without making problematic content. He won't continue to do well. And I don't think he should continue to do well until he fully learns from his mistakes and is called out for them. What's the real problem with all this? Murphy's success. Murphy is on the receiving end of a $300 million deal with Netflix, which is currently the most expensive deal that they have. Shondaland broke the previous record with a $100 million deal, and Murphy has a $300 million deal. So I think that just speaks volumes. And Murphy received this deal after he left his nearly 15-year-long relationship with Fox. Dahmer, the horribly problematic show, is currently the second most watched show on Netflix, and it received over 700 million views within its first 3 weeks of release. This is second to only the fourth season of Stranger Things. This success is no accident. Despite his issues, Murphy is good at what he does. He garners views and he keeps in touch with pop culture in order to appeal particularly to young demographics. As I pointed out throughout this essay, he creates cool concepts. He has some funny characters, and he has tons of good jokes. However, none of these excuse his shortcomings. His shows are sometimes only popular because of controversy that they garner because of how problematic they are. Like Dahmer, the show was heavily criticized and it definitely garnered more views because of it. All of this is to say, we should watch shows critically. It might feel like a bit of a cop out to relate all of this back to like the Me Too movement, but I am going to because Ryan Murphy and his track record is just another example of how Hollywood just like refuses to take any accountability, mainly due to greed, which is a huge problem and leads to things like the Me Too movement. The issues that I've discussed are legitimate criticisms and issues with Murphy's body of work. Racism is horrible. It's a problem, and we shouldn't let people get away with it. And the fact that he keeps getting $1 million producing deals is an indicator of that bigger problem. Murphy's shows do numbers, and that's all that's important to companies like Netflix and Fox, despite any controversy that might come with it, and probably because of the controversy that comes with it, in part. Generally, as audiences in today's streaming age, we're encouraged to consume as much content as possible without ever stopping to think critically about it, like, for example, binge watching content. And when we don't stop to think about what we watch and consider the content, shows like Dahmer become the second most streamed show on Netflix, and Ryan Murphy's projects get greenlighted again and again because of their success. I understand the desire fully to just relax and watch something that doesn't take any thought to consume, but given Hollywood's lack of ability to recommend its highest members, we, the audience, are responsible for deciding which shows do well and thus what producers are given more opportunities. There is power behind our viewing, and when we use that power to back and support a man like Ryan Murphy, we are the problem, and we're telling TV giants like Netflix and Fox that we don't care about Ryan Murphy's issues and that all of his problems aren't actually problems at all. So basically, please just think critically about what you're watching the next time you sit down to watch it. Who is behind this show? Why? What are they getting paid? These are like all good questions to ask yourself, and you might just find some unpleasant truths about who you're supporting with your viewership. Please watch critically. Thank you all for watching. All of the links to my sources will be in the description box, and please tell me your own thoughts and feelings about this topic. Feedback is always appreciated. There's someone in the hallway outside. I can hear them. This is creepy. Are they gone? I think they're gone. Okay.
I chose to record in the stairway because no one ever comes in here because I live on the 10th floor. But I don't like people. I feel really bad for my roommate, so I didn't want to record in there because she's literally still asleep. But it's fine.